Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you if you are new to this study. I'm Pastor Dave St. Alban, and it's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we are looking at the book of Ezekiel, chapter 24. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Ezekiel 24, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, and grab a snack. Let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome. Thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day's been going well. Pray that your week's been going well. Happy Friday. Good to be with you here again as we continue our journey through the Bible, one chapter at a time. And we have made it now into the book of Ezekiel, chapter 24. We are halfway through this book now as we wrap up our study here tonight. So we're making great progress, and I appreciate you being here, whether this is your first time with us, or maybe you've been with us from the very beginning of this study back in September of 2022 when we started with Genesis chapter 1, or maybe you've joined in the class somewhere in between. It's a blessing to be with you, and I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate the questions that I've been getting. Many of you have been sending me private texts or messages asking questions about the studies, and that's great. I appreciate that because one, it lets me know that you're truly engaged in the study, and two, it helps me because I don't profess to have all the answers here. I'm learning like you are, and I'm just teaching what I know. So please keep those questions coming. We learn together. We grow together. We're better together, right? So thank you for being here. Chapter 24, Ezekiel. Now we come to this part in the book where judgment is being executed. Up till this point, Ezekiel had predicted that this judgment was going to fall on Jerusalem, on Judah, in the future. And now that day of judgment has finally arrived. And Ezekiel is going to proceed to announce this judgment that is now here with a parable and two action sermons. We've seen this throughout Ezekiel so far, where he has acted out the message that he's giving rather than speaking it. We're going to see this parable tonight being spoken, and then these acted signs. So within these verses, tonight, chapter 24, we come to the climactic point of all that Ezekiel has been trying to say throughout the previous 12 chapters. And what we're going to see here in chapter 24, in the first 14 verses, is this parable of the cooking pot. And that's going to represent the siege of Jerusalem, which is going to begin on the day that Ezekiel tells this story. So let's get right into it here. Open up your Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 24. If you don't have a Bible with you, not a problem. As always, all the verses are up here on the screen. You can follow along, take some good notes, and we're going to start with the background to this parable of the cooking pot in verses 1 through 3. In the 9th year, in the 10th month, on the 10th day, and if you recall, anytime we see an introduction to some dates like this is the beginning of a new section. A new point is being made. So in the 9th year, and we'll talk about when this is, the 10th month on the 10th day, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, record this date, this very date. Why? Because the king of Babylon has laid siege to Jerusalem on this very day. God is instructing Ezekiel to permanently record the day that this revelation is coming to Ezekiel from God, the word of the Lord. Record it. Why? Because this is the very day Nebuchadnezzar is beginning his siege on Jerusalem. This day, it falls in what we call January. Some scholars date this as January 5th, 587 BC. Others date it as January 15th, 586 BC. The date is recorded. It takes a lot of scholarly research to really glean out when this is, but we know it's in January, early January, 587, 586 BC. And Ezekiel's ability to announce the beginning of the siege from Babylon really validates his ministry as a prophet. He's speaking the exact day. Now, when we get into Zechariah, and you can look ahead, Zechariah 8, verse 19, the Israelites would later memorialize this special day with an annual fast. You'll see it on the 10th month when you get to Zechariah, or when we get to Zechariah 8, we'll see this recorded. So here we have the exact date, validates Ezekiel as a prophet. He knows the date. It's happening. The siege is beginning. Verse 3, and tell this rebellious people a parable. So here's the parable of this cooking pot. And say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. So Ezekiel is to deliver a parable to the people, this rebellious house of Israel. This is one of God's most used titles for the people Israel throughout this book of Ezekiel, this rebellious nation. And here's the parable. Put on the cooking pot, put it on, and pour water in it. So in this parable, the people, because remember, God is saying, tell the people the parable. So Ezekiel's telling them, put on a cauldron, a cooking pot, a bronze pot. We'll see that in verse 11. Put it on the fire, or put this pot over the fire, and then pour water into it. So think of like a large cauldron, a large cooking pot at a campfire with two handles. This type of pot typically would have a round base and a very large mouth, a very large opening. So put this bronze cauldron over the fire, and then verse 4, put water in it, and then put in the pieces of meat, all the choice pieces of meat, the leg, the shoulder. Fill the pot with the best of the bones. Take the pick of the flock, pile wood beneath it for the bones, bring it to a boil, and then cook the bones in this pot. So the people, they're to put this pot over the fire, pour water into it, and then put in these various pieces of choice meat. And then build up a really strong fire under it so that the water boils and that the bones with the meat on it begin to cook, right? Nothing unusual. It's what we would do today when we cook like a stew or something like that. Now, this seems to be a spoken parable, right? Because again, we've seen Ezekiel act some of these out. There's no indication here that he was acting this one out. It seems to have been that they were really doing these things, putting this pot over the fire, adding water, building up the fire, adding meat to it, and boiling the water, cooking it, right? So there's the background to the parable. Then in verses 6 through 8, the focus shifts to the reason for this judgment. So verse 6, for this is what the sovereign Lord says, woe to the city of bloodshed, the pot, which is now encrusted, whose deposit will not go away. So Ezekiel, after telling the people what to do with this pot, was now to announce this woe on them, on the bloody city. In other words, they are no longer a holy city. This bloody city, Jerusalem, which is represented by the pot. And the pot had rust in it. It was encrusted, right? The pot now encrusted means it was rusted, which stood for the blood of the people who had been killed in Jerusalem. Take out the meat piece by piece in whatever order it comes. So Ezekiel was to start to draw out several pieces of meat at random from this cauldron, which perhaps signifies that God was going to rescue a remnant from the judgment, or the pieces of meat may represent the people who died, or it may represent those who went into captivity. But either way, Ezekiel is to perform this act, begin to pull the meat at random out of the pot. Verse 7, for the blood she shed is in her midst. She poured it on the bare rock. She did not pour it on the ground where the dust would cover it. So blood here is a theme. We've seen it the last couple chapters. And remember, blood doesn't necessarily mean like blood shed, physical blood. It means a vile, disgusting act that has taken place. In this instance, the acts of the people, the rebellion of this apostate people. So blood was in Jerusalem's midst, like the blood of a sacrifice that had not been drained out on the ground and covered up, which meant it was atoned for, which is what the law prescribed in Leviticus 17. So rather than them pouring out the blood on the ground and covering it up, which was a symbol of being atoned for, Israel's sins now were spilled for everyone to see, like blood on a bare rock. So not only was Jerusalem a city that had shed a lot of innocent blood, which we've been looking at, it was an unacceptable sacrifice to God because of the blood that was in this detestable act. Verse 8, to stir up wrath and take revenge, I put her blood on the bare rock so that it would not be covered. So God was draining the blood out of Jerusalem by allowing the Babylonians to kill the Israelites within the city. The innocent blood that the people of Jerusalem shed was crying out to God to take vengeance, to bring this wrath on these murderous people, just like Abel's blood had cried out from the ground back in Genesis 4. So as the people of Jerusalem had shed blood openly by killing other people, making these sacrifices of children and such, so too would the Lord shed their blood openly on the bare rock of Jerusalem. It would no longer be an atonement, this blood. This would be for everyone to see the sins of the people. This very severe judgment that was sent by God onto the people of Judah and Jerusalem, it should be a warning to us today. Whenever there's a callous disregard for human life, it's the same thing that the people at this time were doing. They were killing innocent people. They were sacrificing people. There was no value of human life then. It brought on God's judgment, and that hasn't changed. It's the same thing today. And then in verses 9 through 13, we see the results of this judgment. So this next oracle, it stresses not the boiling of the meat in the pot, but the cleansing of the pot by superheating the pot. So this is the second stage in God's judgment process. The first was to pull out these random pieces of meat. The blood was spilled. It was exposed. The sins of the people were exposed for everyone to see. And now God's going to refine this pot. So verse 9. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the city of bloodshed, that is Jerusalem. I too will pile the wood high, right? That's what we saw Ezekiel do in the first part of this parable, was to tell the people to build up the fire, bring in a lot of wood and build it up. God's going to do that too. So heap on the wood, kindle the fire, cook the meat well, mixing in the spices, let the bones be charged. God is pronouncing woe on bloody Jerusalem and is promising to make this pile of bones of the slain people a great thing. So Ezekiel is supposed to kindle this strong fire, boil the meat very well, mix in the spices that were normally used when meat was cooked in this manner, and then let the bones burn. And all of that symbolized the fierceness of the attack on Jerusalem by the Babylonians and the many people that were going to die there. Verse 11. Then set the empty pot on the coals until it becomes hot, and the copper starts to glow so that its impurities may be melted away and its deposits burned away. So next, Ezekiel is to empty the pot of the contents. So remove it from the fire, dump it out, and then put it back on these burning coals with the fire burning hotly underneath it so that it would begin to glow because of the heat, and all the impurities would be burned up, right? Because there's no longer any water, there's no liquid in it. So this is going to get super hot. And what that represents is the continuing purification of Jerusalem after the Israelites were taken off into exile. The city, like this pot, would remain empty. And God would refine it. So this empty pot, it's an empty city. This empty city, this condition would free the city from all the sinful pollution that had taken place there for years to come. The rust on the pot represented the uncleanness of Jerusalem that God was going to cleanse by using the Babylonians to burn it away. Verse 12. It has frustrated all efforts. Its heavy deposit has not been removed, not even by fire. So Jerusalem had really tested God's patience. God was tired of their continual falling away. He had been patient, but he had become tired of being patient with them. And God had toiled to scour the sin of the city away in the past, but the people continued to be obstinate. They continued to be a rebellious people. So they were going to be emptied, and they were going to remain under judgment. Why? Because this sin that left this rusted stain on the pot, on the city, needed to be burned off, purged away. Verse 13, so now your impurity is lewdness, because I tried to cleanse you, right? Because God had brought in prophet after prophet, trying to teach the people what to do. But you would not listen. You would not be cleansed of your impurity. Because of that, you will not be clean again until my wrath against you has subsided. All this adultery, this spiritual adultery, this idolatry, in all its many forms, was a great part of the filthiness of Jerusalem. All that filth clung to the city like all that rust had clung to the pot, even though God had sent prophet after prophet to clean it up. Even though people had already been removed, 605 BC, 597 BC, there were already people being taken into exile. Nothing had worked, so now it's time for a thorough purging of the pot by the fire of God's wrath, because cleansing it with water hadn't been effective, because cleansing it through the prophet, nothing had worked. Now God's going to burn off all this filth with his fire of wrath. Those two things, water and fire, they appear to be two of God's favorite instruments of judgment that we've seen so far through Scripture. Verse 14, I, the Lord, have spoken. The time for me has come to act, right? Now there's a guarantee of this judgment coming on Jerusalem. I will not hold back. I will not have pity, nor will I relent. You will be judged according to your conduct and your actions, declares the sovereign Lord. So in conclusion here to this parable, God is promising this judgment is going to come, just as Ezekiel told you it was coming, just as Jeremiah told you it was coming. I'm not changing my mind. I'm not reducing the punishment. I'm going to thoroughly judge you, people, because of your ongoing rebellion, your conduct, your actions. You are going to be the meat in this pot, and I, the Lord, am going to provide the heat. This is the most emphatic affirmation of divine resolve within this book of Ezekiel. Now, after all the warnings, after all the prophecies, after all the oracles, now it's coming. And then in verses 15 through 27, we see these signs to the exiles. So that preceding parable of the pot, it pictures the siege of Jerusalem itself. Now Ezekiel is going to perform some symbolic acts, apparently on the same day as that parable of the pot. And it's going to represent how the exiles were to respond to the news of this siege. So this is Ezekiel's last acted out sermon to his people before he is unable to do so again for about a year and a half, which this is a turning point for Ezekiel. He's been giving prophecy after prophecy after prophecy. He's been giving sign acts. He's been acting things out. Now that's going to come to an end. And that end is going to begin with the tragic death of his own wife. So verse 15, and here's a turning point in the life of Ezekiel, where at least for now, he's no longer going to be speaking these prophecies. Verse 15, and this is one that is acted out. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, with one blow I am about to take away from you the delight of your eyes. And yet do not lament, do not weep, do not shed any tears. God is telling Ezekiel, and this is very hard scripture here, but we're going to talk about it. God is about to take the life of his beloved wife. Now, the English word for with one blow in verse 16, what that implies is a sudden death or possibly an unexpected death. It could mean death by disease. It could mean death by a plague. It's any type of death that unexpectedly strikes somebody down, whatever way that happened. However his wife died, Ezekiel was not to mourn, he was not to weep, he was not to shed any tears over this personal tragedy. Now, that type of announcement, it raises the question, does God commit unprovoked acts of cruelty just to illustrate a point? So in view of all the revelations of God's character that we've looked at so far, here in Ezekiel and in Lamentations and Jeremiah and Job and the Psalms and the Proverbs, we have to interpret this statement within view of those revelations that God was about to take Ezekiel's wife, meaning that God allowed his wife to die at this precise time. He's using her death, which he predicted was going to happen, predicted to Ezekiel that this was going to come. So God is using her death as a means to communicate a message to the people. Now, this text does not say that God killed her as an object lesson. It's possible she had been ill for a long time already before she died. It's possible that this was just some unexpected tragedy that happened that God's telling Ezekiel, this is going to happen. There's nothing here that implies that God killed her to teach a lesson to anybody. When we look at the death of Christ on the cross, God allowed that to happen as well at precisely the time that God intended it to happen. It's another expression of his love. Now, does that mean God killed his son just as an object lesson? Or, just because God controls the time, the place, the manner in which we die, because God is sovereign, God is omniscient, God is omnipresent, it doesn't mean that we should charge God with cruelty. Just because he chose this time for Ezekiel's wife to die doesn't mean God's a cruel, horrible person that is just killing off people as an object lesson. God is using her death as a means of communicating to Ezekiel and to the people. It doesn't necessarily mean he struck her down just out of being a cruel God to teach everybody a lesson. Here's the lesson. Verse 17, groan quietly. Do not mourn for the dead. Keep your turban fastened. Keep your sandals on your feet. Do not cover your mustache and beard or eat the customary food that mourners eat. So Ezekiel, he can mourn, but he's going to have to do it inwardly. He was not, according to God's command here, to mourn outwardly. Do not lament out loud, weep out loud, shed tears in public. It was customary at this time for relatives of the deceased to wail long and loud with their family, with their friends, even with paid mourners, and we've seen that before in previous books. Ezekiel was to observe none of those customary acts of mourning over the death of his wife, which included throwing dust on his head, which was a sign of mourning, going barefoot, covering his mustache, eating a modest meal after a day of fasting. Those were all customs of grief. Ezekiel was to observe none of those things. Verse 18, and so I spoke to the people in the morning and in the evening that my wife died. And the next morning I did as I was commanded. So sometime shortly after God told Ezekiel that his wife was going to die, he addresses the people on the evening that his wife dies. And he faithfully does as God commands him. And when he does that, verse 19, the people asked him, tell us what these things have to do with us. Why are you acting like this? His actions in response to the death of his wife bewildered the Israelites. And so they asked him to explain to us why you're acting so abnormally. What was this all have to do with us? Ezekiel's entire life was one great big testimony to the exiles, and we see it again here. So what are you doing? What could this possibly have to do with us? So verse 20, so I told them, the word of the Lord came to me, Ezekiel speaking, say to the people of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am about to desecrate my sanctuary, the stronghold in which you take pride, the delight of your eyes, the object of your affection. The sons and daughters you left behind will fall by the sword. Ezekiel is replying that God had said he was about to destroy the temple, kill the relatives of the exiles who remained in Jerusalem. Why? Because the Israelites here loved the temple almost as much as Ezekiel loved his wife. Ezekiel's wife was now gone. And similarly, the temple of Jerusalem, which you people of Israel, which this is the object of your affection, it is now going to be taken. Verse 22, and you, people, are going to do as I have done when I lost my wife. This is what you asked, what does this have to do with us? You're going to do the same things. You're not going to cover your mustache or your beard. You're not going to eat the customary food of the mourners. You'll keep your turbans on your heads. You'll keep your sandals on your feet. You won't mourn. You won't weep. You will waste away because of your sins, and you will groan among yourselves. And Ezekiel will be a sign to you. You will do just as he has done. This is God now speaking. And when that occurs, you will know I am the Lord. Ezekiel is instructing the people. You're going to lose your beloved, just like I lost mine. Your beloved temple. You're going to lose it. And you are to respond to your loss in the same way that I was told to respond to mine. You're not going to mourn. And the reason you're not to mourn publicly, you can do it privately. It's not stated that way. But the reason that they were not to mourn publicly was because this judgment that came upon them was deserved. So who you crying to? You brought this on yourself. Now, certainly Ezekiel didn't bring his wife's death on himself. But again, this is God using her death as a means to teach the people. Just as Ezekiel is mourning, he's grieving the loss of his loved one. You are too. Now you know how he's feeling, except the difference is you, Israelites, you brought this on yourself. Ezekiel had a right to mourn this undeserved personal loss of his wife, but he did not. The Israelites had no right to mourn over their well-deserved national loss, and they could not. They were not to mourn this. And then in verses 25 through 27, we see this sign of Ezekiel's silence. So we had the parable of the pot, the loss of Ezekiel's wife, and now his silence. Verse 25, as for you, son of man, on the day I take away their stronghold, Jerusalem, their joy, their glory, the delight of their eyes, their heart's desires, their sons and their daughters, on that day I take it all away, a fugitive will come to you and tell you the news. So what's happening here is Ezekiel is no longer to deliver any more prophetic messages to his fellow exiles. After he made this explanation in verses 20 through 24, he is not to give any more prophetic messages until he receives word of the destruction of the temple and the capture of the remaining people of Judah. And until that time, he was to be quiet. And in fact, when we get to chapter 33 here in a couple weeks, we'll see this. The news will finally reach him about 5 months after this. So just as Ezekiel, up to this point in time, was to speak to the people only when the Lord gave him a word to speak, now he's to remain quiet until this time when this messenger would bring him news of the destruction of Jerusalem, of the temple, and then and only then was he to open his mouth again. But until then, be silent. Verse 27. But when that message comes, at that time, then your mouth will be open, you will speak, and you will no longer be silent. So you will be a sign to them, and they will know that I am the Lord. So when the news finally arrives that Jerusalem falls, then Ezekiel can continue speaking. And the reason he would resume speaking is because God's going to give him additional prophecies about the land. But his silence during this time of the siege by the Babylonians was testimony to the people of the sorrow of what was taking place. There was no more word from God coming to them. The punishment was here. The judgment had come. Ezekiel was to be a model for these exiles on how they should respond to the siege of Jerusalem. He was told to be quiet. They should take this as a sign that this is an unspeakable tragedy. What could they say? They had brought all this on themselves. And all of this, these examples through Ezekiel and this parable were to teach the Israelites that God was God. This is a pivotal chapter in the development of this book of Ezekiel. Up until now, Ezekiel has proclaimed the Lord's coming judgment on Jerusalem, on Judah, on the temple. He's systematically answered every argument that the people had brought up against him regarding this coming judgment. Now nothing remains except for this discipline to come. And that is Ezekiel chapter 24. And I pray that that has been a help, and I appreciate you being here. We are now halfway through this book. This is one of the last of the long books of the Bible that we are really going to be in until we get to the book of Acts and Matthew. From here on out, we're going to move fairly quickly. So the thought at this point is at least right before Christmas, we should be finished with Ezekiel and getting ready to move into the book of Daniel. And once we move into Daniel, we're going to start to move through the rest of these books of the Old Testament fairly quickly because most of them are very short. So just a little update on where we are at. We will be in this book probably a chapter at a time for quite a while because they're long enough that we don't want to double up. But by Christmas, I would anticipate we should be concluded. But I do appreciate you being here tonight, and I pray this has been a help. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Till then, take care. God bless. Bye-bye.